Most of us buy into this idea that if you just work hard and you're good at what you do, you'll get ahead. It's the whole promise of meritocracy, right? A system that's supposed to reward your talent and your effort and nothing else. But what if I told you that the very act of trying to be fair, of constantly talking about meritocracy, could actually make our workplaces more biased? Yeah, let's dive into this pretty surprising paradox.
I mean, this idea is practically baked into our culture. We like to think of the workplace as this great equalizer, where the only thing that really matters is how well you perform. It's a really powerful and frankly inspiring ideal, the idea that it doesn't matter where you start, it's about where you finish.
So that's the big question, isn't it? It sounds simple, but the answer is, well, it's incredibly complex. The research we're about to get into suggests there's this massive gap between the ideal we all believe in and the reality of how decisions actually get made.
All right, so first things first, let's get crystal clear on what we're actually talking about. What is this promise that meritocracy makes to all of us? This is the gold standard. In a true meritocracy, things like your gender, your race, whether your parents were wealthy, all of that is supposed to be completely irrelevant. Rewards, we're talking promotions, bonuses, the best projects, they're all tied directly to your skills and what you bring to the table. Sounds perfectly fair, right? Okay, but here's where we start to see the first crack in that perfect ideal. It's something called the accumulation effect, and it's all about how these tiny, almost insignificant differences at the very beginning of a career can snowball into huge gaps over time. Let's make this real. Imagine two people, Jess and Jason. Now, the crucial thing here is that they have the exact same innate capabilities. They're equally smart, equally driven. But their starting blocks are in totally different places. Jess is a black woman from a poor family who went to community college. Jason is a white man from a wealthy family who went to a top-tier university. And this is where that initial difference starts to matter a lot. Jason's fancy degree and maybe some family connections help him land a slightly better first job than Jess. It's not because he's better, it's because of that unearned advantage. And that better job, it comes with more interesting work, more chances to learn, more opportunities to grow. This is a textbook example of what's called cumulative advantage. The easiest way to think about it is the rich get richer effect, but for careers. Jason's little head start doesn't just stay a little head start, it compounds. He gets more resources, better mentorship, bigger opportunities, which of course helps him perform better, which gets him even more resources. And all the while, Jess is fighting an uphill battle just to keep pace. And look, this isn't just one simple thing. When you look at a model like this, you see it's a whole web of factors all tangled together. Your motivation, stereotypes people hold, your social network, how the company itself is structured. What started as a tiny gap between Jess and Jason can become a giant chasm because all these different forces are basically pushing them further and further apart. Now, all of this is leading up to the central, kind of mind-bending idea of this whole explainer. This is where it gets really interesting. It's called the meritocracy paradox. I want you to read that again. The very companies that shout the loudest about being fair, the ones that put meritocracy in their core values, they can end up being the least fair. This finding is just so powerful because it cuts against everything we assume about how to make a workplace more equal. And hey, this isn't just some wild theory. There was this amazing experiment where researchers gave managers identical employee profiles. The only thing they changed was the gender. And they found that when the company's culture was all about meritocracy, the managers actually showed more gender bias. They gave the man a bigger bonus, they said he had more potential, and they were way more forgiving of his mistakes, even when his performance was exactly the same as the woman's. So why on earth does this happen? Well, it's all about our psychology. When your company tells you over and over again, we are a meritocracy, you start to believe it. You think, I'm a fair person, my decisions are objective, and that belief basically gives you a free pass. It makes you less likely to question your own gut feelings, and you become blind to the subtle biases that are really pulling the strings. Which, of course, brings us to the real culprit behind this paradox. All those hidden biases that are humming away in the background of our minds, often completely without our permission. Think of these as the mental shortcuts our brain uses to get through the day. They're not necessarily malicious or evil, they're just a natural part of being human, but they can lead us to make some pretty unfair judgments without ever even knowing we're doing it, especially when we're convinced we're being totally objective. Let's just take one of the biggest ones, affinity bias. It's really simple.
It's our natural pull towards people who remind us of ourselves, people who have a similar background or similar interests, or just a similar way of talking. When it comes to a hiring or promotion decision, this can mean we subconsciously lean towards the person who feels like a good fit instead of the person who is actually the most qualified for the job. And then you've got confirmation bias. Our brains just love being right. So once we get an initial idea about someone, like Jason is a real star because he went to that great university, we then start looking for evidence that proves us right, and we subconsciously ignore anything that proves us wrong. We see his wins as proof of his genius, but we write off his failures as just bad luck. And for someone like Jess, the exact opposite can happen. Okay, so if just declaring we're a meritocracy can totally backfire, then what actually works? How do we get from this myth of fairness to the reality of it? Well, it starts with us as individuals. And there's this fantastic tool for it, an acronym called PAUSE. Before you make a big call about someone, you just pause. Pay attention to what's going on under the surface. Acknowledge your gut reaction. Then actively try to understand other ways to look at the situation. That simple act of slowing down can be enough to interrupt our biases before they turn into an unfair decision. But, individual effort only goes so far. The systems themselves have to change. For example, think about moving away from an old school tenure model, where you just get promoted because you've been there the longest, to a modern skills-based model. When you focus on concrete abilities and performance data, it just makes everything more transparent, and it makes it a lot harder for those hidden biases to creep in. Ultimately, organizations need to build systems that actively fight against bias. That means getting rid of those winner-take-all cultures that create these huge gaps between the top and everyone else. It means being humble and actually questioning if your processes are as fair as you think. And it absolutely means having structured, transparent reviews where managers are actually held accountable for making fair decisions. And all of this leaves us with one last really tough question to chew on. We all want to reward merit. Of course we do. But if our whole idea of merit is being shaped by hidden advantages and unconscious bias, then just trying to reward it isn't going to be enough. We have to look deeper. We have to ask ourselves, what are we really measuring? And what kind of workplace are those measurements actually creating?